Hey there, sleepyheads. If you're here right now, maybe it's late, and your mind just needed a softer place to land. Maybe you're lying in bed, scrolling under dim lights, looking for something calm, familiar, maybe even comforting. If so, you're exactly where you should be. Tonight, we're not just talking about SpongeBob. We're going back to a feeling quiet mornings, warm blankets, cartoons playing softly in the background. Back when life felt lighter. So take a breath. Let the day fade. Pull your blanket a little closer. And let's begin. Back then, nights felt slower, like they had more room to breathe. The light in the living room didn't feel harsh. It just gently settled into the corners, like it knew the day was already tired. You didn't always sit down intending to watch anything. Sometimes the TV was just there, glowing softly like a nightlight you could trust. You might have curled up on the couch after school with snacks, or maybe late at night when everyone else was asleep, and the silence around you felt bigger than usual. But the TV made it feel less empty, almost like it could listen. Something about the quiet hum of the speakers made it easier to rest, especially during those reruns that aired way too late for kids to be awake. But you stayed up anyway. You didn't argue with yourself or think about responsibilities the way you do now. You just watched, or half-watched, letting scenes drift by like slow waves. But that wasn't where it ended. The sound of the TV wasn't just background noise. It kind of became company. It filled the silence in a soft, harmless way, like a blanket made of sound. Sometimes, you didn't even remember the full episode the next day. Just colors and voices floating in your memory. You might picture SpongeBob running down the street, or Squidward sighing behind the register. But it was never clear. It was more like traces of dreams, the kind that fade when morning light sneaks in through your blinds. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It's that even if you forgot the episodes, you still remembered how they made you feel, like someone was still awake with you. There were nights when the world outside the window felt distant, almost unreal. You could hear a car passing every now and then, or the fridge humming softly in the kitchen. All those little home noises that usually go unnoticed suddenly mattered. They created a small rhythm that felt safe, like the house itself was breathing slowly beside you. The cartoons added a soft melody, the kind that didn't try to teach or scare, just gently exist. Maybe that feeling only grew stronger when your eyes started getting heavy and the room felt warmer. There's a kind of comfort that comes from not paying full attention, just hearing voices you recognize, just seeing familiar places like the Krusty Krab or the pineapple house underwater. You weren't really analyzing anything. You were just there, floating along with the animation, and something about that moment stayed. It was like Bikini Bottom existed quietly in the corner of your mind, waiting for you to visit whenever real life got too loud. Even now, you might still feel it sometimes, like a soft memory brushing against the back of your thoughts. You might have experienced those late-night reruns, the ones where the ads were slower and the jokes somehow felt calmer. The type of episodes you don't find easily anymore. They weren't trying to impress anyone. They were just keeping you company. There was no pressure to laugh, no need to understand the plot. You just let it play, eyes heavy, mind drifting. And it didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. The show became a place to go, not just something to watch. Maybe you can still remember how the screen looked from across the room, how it painted everything with that soft blue glow. Maybe your blanket felt a little colder at first, but got warm quickly, like it knew you'd settle there for a while. Maybe you were alone, or maybe someone else was asleep nearby. Either way, it still felt okay. And even now, thinking about it, that memory doesn't feel loud or bright. It feels quiet. It feels like something you carry gently. It feels like something you return to when nights get heavy, when the world demands too much, and your thoughts aren't ready to quiet down. Because back then, SpongeBob didn't need to speak directly to you. The show itself somehow knew what you needed. The soft laughter, the little music cues between scenes, the familiar voices that sounded exactly the same every time, like they were frozen in a safe part of time. Maybe that's why we remember it differently than other shows, not because of specific episodes, but because of how it felt, lingering in the air. And that feeling only grew stronger later, but we'll get there soon. For now, just rest in that soft glow and let the tide slowly come in. There was something about Bikini Bottom that didn't feel like just a cartoon setting. It felt like a real place, tucked somewhere beyond what we could reach, but still close enough to touch. You could almost imagine the ocean currents and the soft blue water moving just off-screen. The Krusty Krab wasn't just a restaurant. It felt like that one spot in town everyone knew, the kind that stayed open even after the lights dimmed. But that wasn't where it ended. The more time passed, the more the world felt connected to ours somehow, like memory leaking into imagination. When you were younger, maybe it felt natural to believe that Bikini Bottom kept going when you turned the TV off. You'd go to school the next morning, and in the back of your mind, you knew SpongeBob was still flipping patties, Squidward was still annoyed, and Patrick was probably napping under his rock. It was like the episode paused, but the world didn't. That quiet idea stayed with you, even if you didn't say it out loud. Maybe you still carry a piece of it. Not in clear scenes, more like faded colors in the mind. There were moments that felt strangely human. SpongeBob waiting for the bus, Squidward sighing at his window, Sandy working late on a project no one really understood. These things didn't feel exaggerated. They felt familiar. Maybe you noticed it late at night, when you were finishing homework with the TV on. The screen faded in and out, and your eyelids started getting heavy. You didn't fully watch every second, but you felt it. Something about Bikini Bottom was quietly honest, more honest than most people ever were in real life. Sometimes you didn't even watch the characters. You watched the background, the small buildings, the street lamps, the way jellyfish floated across the sky like they had nowhere important to be. It kind of mirrored real life in its own slow rhythm. The soft hum of distant cars outside, the fridge humming behind you, a half-open window letting in pale night air. Those sensory details blended with the show until it didn't feel like fiction at all. Something about that moment stayed, like the show gently wrapped itself around your own world. You might have felt that, especially during summer mornings. Cereal in hand, maybe still half asleep, watching SpongeBob while sunlight slipped through the curtains. No school, no stress, just that bright, underwater town, always awake before you were. Even now, thinking about it feels like taking a slow breath. That wasn't just entertainment. It was a kind of escape, a place that felt safe enough for your thoughts to rest. It didn't end there. Sometimes real life felt louder, and Bikini Bottom stayed peaceful. Maybe you remember a specific feeling when an episode ended. The closing music played, and the world on screen faded away. But somehow, it didn't really disappear. You might have imagined their day continuing. A few more jellyfish floating, Mr. Krabs closing the register, Squidward finally relaxing. It felt like their world didn't need you to exist. It just did. And that made it easier to believe in, as if reality had more layers than what was visible, layers you could revisit whenever life felt a little too grown up. Those quiet scenes, empty streets, long sunsets, almost felt like they were meant for night listeners. People who stay awake longer than they should. People who think too much when everything goes quiet. Maybe that's why it stuck with us. Bikini Bottom wasn't loud unless it wanted to be. It knew how to rest. It knew how to breathe. And it gently gave permission for us to do the same. Sometimes, nostalgia doesn't come back in clear memories. It arrives as atmosphere, blue water, faint cartoon music echoing down a hallway from years ago, the distant scent of cereal you haven't eaten in a decade. Those fragments feel real, because in a way, they always were. They didn't need to be logical to matter. They just needed to be felt. And you might have felt them most when things were quiet, when the lights were dim, when Bikini Bottom felt like a soft, parallel world you could visit without saying a word. It didn't end there. Something changed quietly afterward. Because once a fictional place begins to feel real, you never truly leave it. And maybe it never truly left you either. Every show has its big moments, the ones that get rewatched and quoted and turned into memes. But before those, in between them, there were smaller moments, quieter ones, episodes that didn't try to make you laugh too hard. They just existed, and something about that made them linger in a different way. It didn't feel like the writers were trying to impress anyone. It felt like they'd simply let Bikini Bottom breathe. But that wasn't the strange part yet. These quiet episodes weren't loud enough to be remembered, but somehow they never fully faded. Maybe you felt it too. Those softer episodes, the ones that aired late, maybe even during school nights, felt like background comfort. SpongeBob sweeping the floor slowly. Squidward painting alone, not for attention, just because he needed to. Patrick blinking into the sky with no real expression at all. Nothing dramatic happened. Nothing wild. It was more like the show paused and let the characters just be. And in a world that moves too fast, those still moments meant more than we realized. They felt kind of real, like they were whispering instead of shouting. Sometimes, those episodes came when you weren't in a loud mood yourself. Maybe it was one of those evenings when your energy was low, but your thoughts were loud. Homework was done, or maybe it wasn't, but you didn't have the space to care. The TV flickered softly. You weren't seeking comedy. You were just seeking company. That's when the quietest episodes made the most sense. They didn't demand your attention. They simply offered it. There was something comforting about scenes that didn't rush. SpongeBob staring at a sunset that lasted a little longer than usual. The way the orange sky stretched across the water, the way seagulls faded into the distance. It almost felt like the animators forgot to cut to the next shot, but that wasn't where it ended. Maybe they knew the beauty of letting stillness stay. You could almost hear the gentle rumble of distant traffic outside your own window as the moment unfolded. It didn't push you. It allowed you. Squidward was often the center of those softer moments. Not yelling, not annoyed, just quiet. He'd sit in his chair, paintbrush in hand, and the world around him moved slowly. The background music was softer. The colors were cooler. You might have seen something in him then that you couldn't quite put into words. Maybe you felt it in yourself, too. Those evenings when you weren't upset, just quietly tired. The fridge humming behind you, a lamp glowing in the corner, thoughts coming and going like small waves. There was comfort in episodes that didn't try to be remembered. They slipped between the popular ones, like extra breaths between sentences. The kind of moments that don't get talked about, but somehow feel important later. You might not recall dialogue or plot. Maybe you only remember the atmosphere, the hazy feeling of calm, the slight echo of footsteps in a nearly empty street of Bikini Bottom. Something about that stayed. It wasn't nostalgia built around excitement. It was nostalgia made of peace. Some people say they can't find certain episodes anymore. They search online, and nothing comes up. No clips, no screenshots. Just a faint memory that something slower once existed. A walk through town, a quiet ocean, SpongeBob not talking for a stretch of time. The scene didn't need words. It relied on stillness, the kind that softly invites reflection. Maybe you've had a night like that too. You weren't sad. You weren't busy. You were just there, breathing with thought. Those quiet episodes weren't designed to be iconic, but maybe that's why they mattered. They felt human. They felt like small pieces of life, the kind you don't notice while they're happening, only when they've passed. Something about that idea stayed, tucked somewhere deep in the mind. Hidden, but not gone. Lost, but familiar. It didn't end there. Later on, something else about those moments quietly changed. They grew into more than memories. They turned into places you could revisit when real life felt too loud. You didn't need clear details. You only needed the feeling. And that feeling still lingers, even now, softly waiting for the next tide to rise. There was a quiet rumor back then, nothing wild, nothing spooky, just a soft idea that floated around like a breeze no one could trace. People said there was a SpongeBob episode that never actually aired. No one could describe it fully, and yet everyone seemed to know something about it. It didn't scream for attention. It whispered, and sometimes whispers stay longer than the loudest scenes ever could. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It felt like a memory without a source, something half believed but fully felt. You might have heard it somewhere too. Maybe from a friend at school when the bell rang and everyone moved slowly through the halls. Maybe during a sleepover when the snacks were almost gone and the TV was playing reruns no one was really watching. Someone would say they remembered an episode where things looked just a little different. Not scary, not broken, just older, a little softer around the edges, as if time itself had brushed against the animation. They said Patrick looked older somehow, his eyes a bit heavier, his voice quieter. SpongeBob's colors weren't as bright, like the saturation had faded just slightly, the way memories do over time. The pacing was calm, with scenes that stretched longer than usual. No punchlines waiting around the corner, no big twist. Just the town moving, as if it had lived for years before we saw it, and would keep living years after. You might have felt something like this before, when real life starts to feel a little bit like a show you've already seen. The most talked about moment was a long ocean shot, far longer than TV rules allow. SpongeBob stood near the shoreline, not saying a word, just watching the water move. The waves rolled at an ordinary pace, like real waves do, not animation loops. Some people say you could hear seagulls very faintly, even though Bikini Bottom is underwater. Others said the wind sounded like it was coming from your own window, like it belonged to your room, not the show. And that feeling only grew stronger later, as if the scene knew we'd remember it someday. Teachers, older siblings, even parents vaguely mentioned it, like they'd caught a glimpse years ago. No one argued about it, but no one proved it either. It rested in that quiet space where memory and imagination overlap, like walking down a street you swear you visited, even though you know you haven't. You don't question it, because it feels true. And sometimes, what feels true sticks deeper than what's factual. That's how folklore begins, slowly, softly, without trying. Maybe the reason it felt real is because the world of Bikini Bottom already felt lived in. Buildings were worn, signs flickered, characters had routines that didn't need explaining. Some mornings felt like Mondays, even underwater, and maybe that's why the lost episode didn't seem impossible. It felt like something that could have existed between regular ones, quietly tucked away like an extra breath between sentences. You might have felt this too, when silence makes more sense than explanation. There's a special kind of mystery that doesn't need answers. It just wants to exist. This rumor didn't grow wild on the internet. It lived quietly, like something meant to be passed along in low voices during late-night walks or hushed conversations before sleep. It never asked to be documented. It just drifted through time like a jellyfish riding the current. And maybe that makes it even more believable. Not a ghost story, not a secret code, just a feeling. And even now, maybe part of you still wonders if it existed. Maybe you've had a moment where you pictured that ocean shot without trying. SpongeBob standing there, eyes reflecting soft light, as though he knew something you didn't. No dialogue, just waves. Just the sound of your own breathing blending with the quietest parts of the show. And that wasn't where it ended. That feeling of something real but unproven has followed many of us into adulthood. Maybe it never aired, or maybe it aired in a way only memory could hold. But tonight, we're not chasing proof. We're just walking along that shoreline in the dark, listening to the waves roll in, letting imagination do exactly what it was made to do. Because some episodes live outside the screen and linger quietly where memory meets the tide. There's a certain kind of night where silence doesn't feel peaceful. It feels heavy. The kind where your thoughts move too fast to rest, but your body is already tired. Those were the nights when the TV mattered most, not because of what it said, but because it didn't leave. And maybe that's when SpongeBob stopped feeling like just a cartoon. He became a quiet presence. Familiar, consistent, not someone who tried to solve anything, just someone who stayed. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It's that sometimes His laugh felt like a tiny reminder that things could still be okay. There was something steady about him. You could turn on the TV at almost any hour and find him there, smiling like he'd been waiting for you to return. Even if you didn't catch the beginning of the episode, it didn't matter. That kind of reliability means more than we notice, especially when the world around you felt uncertain. School stress building up, friends changing, real life becoming louder with every month that passed. SpongeBob always sounded the same, looked the same, acted the same. He didn't evolve the way life forced you to. He stayed predictable, in the best way. You might remember coming home tired, backpack dropped by the door, lights dim, legs heavy. Maybe you grabbed snacks, or maybe you just lay on the couch with the remote in your hand, not really choosing anything, just hoping something gentle would play. And when SpongeBob showed up on screen, it felt safe to exhale. His voice had a way of taking the edge off the day. You could almost hear the distant cars outside, like the world was still awake, but your room was allowed to stop trying. Even if things went wrong in his episodes, the energy never turned dark. Nothing truly lasted. Sad moments got solved. Problems untangled themselves. Bikini Bottom didn't hold grudges. That simple rhythm felt like reassurance. Maybe problems in your life could soften too. Maybe mornings would look better. And that feeling only grew stronger later, especially during late-night reruns, when the episodes felt slower and the laughter tracks felt more like familiar echoes. You didn't need to talk. You just needed sound that felt kind. Around this time, SpongeBob began to feel less like a show and more like someone sitting beside you. Someone who didn't ask questions. Someone who kept the silence from becoming too loud. On nights when sleep wouldn't come easily, his laugh gently filled the spaces your thoughts tried to crowd. Not solving anything, but giving your mind something soft to hold on to. You might have felt it most when he wasn't doing anything exciting at all, just walking to work, or watering a plant, or daydreaming with Patrick under a wide blue sky. There's a kind of comfort in characters who always return, in knowing that whether weeks or months or years pass, they're still there. Not older, not busier, just there. It's the kind of stability real life rarely gives. SpongeBob didn't evolve with age. He never had a phase where he drifted away from you, and maybe that's why so many people felt connected to him. There was no guilt watching him again, no need to catch up, no fear of being left behind. Some listeners might remember leaving the TV on while they fell asleep, not really watching, but letting it play like a lullaby. The faint glow of the screen, the low volume so the neighbors wouldn't hear, the faint sound of laughter drifting down the hallway. You might even remember waking up at 3 a.m. and hearing the ending theme before the channel switched to another show. But that wasn't where it ended. That moment carried a strange comfort. You weren't fully awake, but you weren't alone either. Even now, thinking back might make your shoulders relax just a bit, because SpongeBob didn't need to be deep or complex to matter. He just needed to be present. And sometimes, that's all a friend really is. Someone who stays, even when you have nothing to say. It didn't take words to feel that connection. Just time. Just familiarity. Just those glowing colors and voices that never hurried your thoughts. Maybe that's the real power of cartoons late at night. They don't try to fix anything. They just let you drift until your mind finds calmer water. And Bikini Bottom always had room for one more tired traveler. There's a moment, somewhere between childhood and adulthood, when Squidward stops being just the grumpy neighbor. It happens quietly. You don't plan for it. But one day, his sigh doesn't sound overdramatic anymore. It sounds familiar. The clarinet echoing against his empty walls doesn't feel like a gag. It feels like someone trying to fill silence the best way they know how. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It's how your perspective shifted, without anyone telling you to grow up. Real life did that on its own. As a kid, Squidward just seemed mean. Always annoyed, always tired, always wishing SpongeBob would calm down. But when school got harder, when the mornings started faster and the nights stretched longer, something softened about him. Not on screen, but inside you. You began to understand the kind of tired he carried. It wasn't dramatic sadness. It was quiet exhaustion, the kind that builds after long days and too many responsibilities. The kind that doesn't make a sound, but stays. Maybe it happened after your first job, or the semester when assignments stacked up, or when friends grew distant and conversations took more energy than before. You might have walked into your room one evening, shoes still on, and just sat there, without saying a word. And in that moment, Squidward's long pauses suddenly made more sense. You might have felt something like this before, when you were too tired to complain, but too awake to rest. His house on screen used to look dull, cold colors, empty corners, but later it looked peaceful, like the kind of space meant for recovering from the day. Maybe you noticed how the floor was always clean, how everything was aligned, how his routines were simple. There's comfort in structure, especially when life feels unpredictable. And maybe Squidward wasn't bitter. Maybe he just needed quiet more than he needed company. Sometimes you could hear his clarinet playing while SpongeBob and Patrick made noise outside. That single soft melody felt like the sound of someone trying to create something gentle in a world that kept asking for loudness. You could almost imagine it echoing into your own room at night, the same way real life echoes after a long day. The fridge humming behind you, the ceiling fan turning slowly. Maybe you weren't upset. Maybe you were just worn down in places no one could see. But it didn't end there. As the years passed, Squidward became less of a joke and more of a mirror. He didn't hate happiness. He just couldn't keep up with constant cheerfulness. And perhaps that felt real too. Some days, high energy isn't encouragement. It's pressure. And Bikini Bottom often seemed too bright for him. Maybe you've lived days like that, where the world felt one shade too loud, and silence seemed easier than smiling. He wasn't perfect, but neither were we. And that's what made him quietly important. Squidward showed a different side of growing up. Not the exciting kind, but the realistic kind. The kind where dreams get complicated, and time feels shorter, and peace becomes something you seek more actively than joy. Sometimes, that peace looks like turning the TV on and saying nothing at all. There's a softness in realizing that characters don't change, but we do. SpongeBob stayed cheerful. Patrick stayed simple. But Squidward, he stayed relatable, adjusting silently as we aged. His frustration began to sound less like negativity and more like honesty. He didn't pretend things were okay when they weren't. There's a quiet strength in that kind of truth, in not faking a smile when your heart isn't in it. But that wasn't where it ended. As life moved forward, there was another shift. Squidward slowly started to feel less alone. Because even when he pushed SpongeBob away, SpongeBob never really left. And maybe that meant something. Maybe deep down, the show was quietly saying that we don't need to be okay to deserve company. That gentle loyalty might be the strongest kind of kindness. You don't need to explain your exhaustion, or your sighs, or the way some days feel heavier than others. Squidward never explained his either. He just kept going. And sometimes, that's all that matters. And maybe that tired, honest kind of survival is its own version of hope. Patrick used to be easy to dismiss, just the goofy best friend, the one who made simple jokes and never thought things through. But the older you got, the more his world looked different. Maybe it even felt peaceful. He wasn't worried about the next step. He didn't plan every moment. He didn't overthink every choice. He just existed, softly, like the world didn't owe him anything, and he didn't owe it anything back. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It was how his simplicity started to feel like strength instead of weakness. In a world where everything moves fast, notifications buzzing, deadlines stacking up, conversations feeling like competitions, Patrick stayed still, and somehow that felt powerful. While everyone else was trying to prove something, he never tried at all. He wasn't chasing success. He wasn't running from failure. His rhythm was slower, closer to the pace of breathing than the pace of pressure. You might have felt something like this before, when doing nothing felt right, even though the world kept telling you to do more. Sometimes his scenes were strangely calming. Patrick lying on the sand, staring quietly at the sky, sitting on a rock, absent-mindedly eating ice cream, laughing for no clear reason, no stress, no expectation, just small moments that didn't need meaning to exist. And maybe that's where his quiet wisdom lived. Not in what he said, but in what he didn't. His silence wasn't emptiness. It was acceptance. Maybe you noticed it most when your own mind felt overcrowded, thoughts stacking on top of each other, the pressure to keep up, the fear of falling behind. Anxiety doesn't always shout. Sometimes it hums in the background, wearing you down slowly. But watching Patrick was like stepping into softer air for a moment. His world didn't rush you. His presence didn't judge you. Even his home, a simple rock, felt like a gentle reminder that comfort doesn't have to be complicated. It didn't end there. As time went on, Patrick began to resemble something rare, someone who lives fully in the present. He didn't analyze. He didn't worry about tomorrow. His happiness wasn't loud or forced. It was soft, natural, the kind that appears when you're not actively looking for it. You could almost imagine lying in your own bed, the faint glow of your phone screen fading as the fridge hums softly behind you, wishing you could rest the way he does, without fear of stillness. There's a quiet beauty in simple days, the type that don't need achievements to count, the kind where you eat when you're hungry, nap when you're tired, and laugh whenever the moment asks you to. Patrick didn't struggle with his worth. He didn't measure his life by productivity. He woke up, existed, and that was enough. Maybe we started to realize that doing nothing isn't a failure. It's recovery. It's healing. It's what our minds sometimes need before they can move forward again. As kids, we thought SpongeBob was the role model, the hardworking one, always chasing excitement. But as life unfolded, Patrick started feeling like the character we secretly wished we could be. Stress-free, anxiety-free, just living. Not perfectly, but calmly. You might have felt it late at night, when you closed your eyes and wished your thoughts would simply stop. Patrick's way of living wasn't reckless. It was restful. And that wasn't where it ended, because what once seemed foolish started to resemble freedom. A reminder that the quietest form of wisdom might be this: you don't always need a plan. Not every moment has to be productive. Some days are just meant to be lived, without guilt, without pressure, without explanation. Patrick wasn't running from responsibility. He just wasn't afraid of rest, and in a world that never slows down, that kind of courage becomes rare. So, maybe the real lesson in his laughter isn't silliness. Maybe it's permission to breathe, to pause, to exist, without needing a reason first. There was always something different about Jellyfish Fields. Even when everything else in the show felt bright and loud, that place moved at its own pace. Slow, gentle, unbothered. The hills were wide and soft, like they were made for resting. The wind always seemed to pass through quietly, brushing the grass without ever rushing it. And the sky, sometimes it turned this pale watercolor pink, like a sunset trying not to wake anyone up. But that wasn't the strange part yet. It's how those scenes felt less like animation and more like a memory, almost like a place you'd visited before. You didn't watch those scenes for jokes. You watched them to breathe, to slow your heartbeat a little. It was the kind of moment where your body relaxed before your mind caught up. As kids, maybe we didn't notice it. But as time went on, Jellyfish Fields started to feel like a mental escape hatch, a place to go when the real world felt too heavy, too fast. You might have felt something like this before, when your thoughts were restless, but your eyes just wanted color and calm. Some people said there was a lost episode, a quiet one, where SpongeBob didn't speak at all. No laugh, no dialogue, just the soft sound of his footsteps across the field, walking slowly under an orange-pink sky. The scene went on for nearly 11 minutes. No plot, no explanation. Just SpongeBob breathing with the world. The jellyfish floated around him like tiny lanterns drifting in the wind. And somehow, that silence said more than words ever could. You could almost imagine watching it late at night. The house already quiet, streetlights flickering through half-closed blinds. Maybe a blanket pulled to your chin. Maybe cereal left unfinished on the table. The distant hum of a fan turning somewhere in the room. The TV gently glowing. No one else awake. And SpongeBob just walking, not trying to fix anything, not trying to entertain. Just existing, the way we sometimes wish we knew how to. The more life got complicated, the more that place felt real. You might have pictured yourself there, a soft breeze touching your skin, grass bending under your step, a jellyfish passing close enough to hear the tiniest shimmer. You didn't need answers. You just needed space. And that's what Jellyfish Fields always gave. Unspoken permission to slow down, to pause, to drift. Even your thoughts seemed to move more gently there, like they finally found a route with less traffic. But that wasn't where it ended. The real power of that scene, the reason it stayed, was because it didn't try to be remembered. It simply existed, like a natural breath between louder moments. Memory held it like a secret, letting it live just out of reach. Whether the episode ever existed doesn't matter. The feeling did. The feeling that sometimes peace doesn't arrive loudly. It arrives slowly, like a soft tide that doesn't ask permission before brushing against your feet. Maybe you've imagined it since then. A moment where everything paused, and Bikini Bottom felt almost dreamlike. The jellyfish floating in slow motion, the sky shifting colors without hurry, SpongeBob's footsteps settling into the earth, like he was carrying nothing. No urgency, no fear of tomorrow. Just quiet. Pure, gentle quiet. The kind you can almost hear, like a silent song humming beneath the world. You can picture it now, can't you? The wind wrapping around you like a blanket. The distant hum of cartoon music you can't fully remember. The grass moving in rhythm with your breath. That's the kind of scene that doesn't leave. It finds a corner in your memory and stays there for years, ready whenever you need it again. Because maybe Jellyfish Fields isn't just a location in a cartoon. Maybe it's a place your mind visits, when rest becomes more important than reason. There was a rumor, quiet and unprovable, about an episode that didn't have a title card. No narrator, no theme song, just the soft sound of ocean waves, moving gently like they had nowhere to be. People who remembered it couldn't agree on anything specific. No plot, no dialogue, only the way it felt. Like walking through Bikini Bottom after everyone else went to sleep. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strangest part was how so many people claimed to recall something that might have never existed, yet felt real enough to stay. This episode, if it ever existed, didn't begin with SpongeBob giggling or Squidward groaning. It simply opened on a beach, a faded blue sky, a shoreline that seemed to stretch past the edge of the frame. SpongeBob was there, but he didn't speak. He just walked, footprints forming behind him in the sand. No music followed, only the sound of distant waves, and maybe, if you listened closely enough, your own breathing starting to match their rhythm. Something about it felt different from a regular episode. It moved slower, like time didn't matter, like the animators forgot to speed things up. And in that stillness, the world felt strangely alive. You could almost hear the distant cars outside your own window, blending with the rustle of sea breeze on screen. It didn't ask for attention. It wasn't trying to be remembered. But that feeling stayed, tucked away like a note you stumble on years later, still carrying its quiet weight. People who talked about it never tried to make it sound mysterious. The way they described it sounded more like describing a dream. Just pieces, feelings, blurry impressions. SpongeBob looking out at the sea, a jellyfish floating a little slower than normal. A long pause before the camera shifted, but no fear, no twisted imagery, just stillness. Maybe you've had dreams like that too, where nothing really happens, yet something meaningful lingers the moment you wake up. You might imagine watching it late at night, curled up under blankets, volume low, the room dim, the fridge humming softly in the background. The kind of hour where your mind drifts between thoughts and reality seems slightly softened. And then, without warning, you realize SpongeBob still hasn't spoken a word. That silence isn't uneasy. It's comforting, like the show is finally letting you rest instead of keeping you alert. Some say the episode ended without credits. Just a slow fade to a darker sky as SpongeBob sat down near the tide. Nothing conclusive, nothing resolved, as if whatever story was happening existed beyond the screen, beyond whatever we were allowed to see. And that wasn't where it ended, because a story that doesn't close properly tends to live longer. It becomes folklore, passed through memories that don't need accuracy to matter. Maybe this episode never aired. Maybe it never existed. Maybe it was just something kids imagined during late-night reruns, when sleep blurred the lines between real scenes and half-dreamed ones. But maybe that's exactly why it stayed. Memory doesn't always need facts. Sometimes it just needs feeling. And what people remember most isn't what happened. It's how the world looked. Empty streets, warm sunset colors, footsteps on sand with no footprints ahead, only behind. Almost like SpongeBob wasn't getting somewhere. He was coming back from something. And that small detail made everything feel bigger than a cartoon. It almost felt like real life, disguised under animation. You might have felt something like this before, in your own life, walking home after dark, when everything is quieter than usual. Streetlights flickering, breeze moving the trees just enough to hear them. The world doesn't explain itself during those moments. It just exists, softly, fully, honestly. This episode might not belong to television history, but it belongs somewhere quieter. Maybe in your memory, maybe in your imagination, or maybe in that space between them, where stories go when they're not ready to end, but too gentle to demand attention. Maybe it never aired. Maybe it aired only once, inside someone's sleepy mind. But it stayed, the way dreams sometimes do, long after you wake up. There was a quiet rumor, not about a lost episode, but about a moment, a scene, maybe just a few seconds long, where SpongeBob didn't look quite the same. He wasn't wrinkled or sad, just a little tired, like he'd lived a long day before the episode even started. The animation looked slightly faded around the edges, like an old photo softened by time. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was that many people felt they'd seen it, even though no clip ever surfaced, almost like we carried the moment inside us, whether it really happened or not. Maybe it wasn't an actual scene. Maybe it was how our minds changed while we grew up. SpongeBob kept smiling, always energetic, but something in us shifted. Life got busier. Days started earlier and ended faster. Homework turned into jobs. Friendships changed shape. And suddenly, his cheerful voice didn't just sound funny. It sounded brave, because staying hopeful started to feel like effort. And maybe that's when SpongeBob began to look a little older. Not on screen, but inside us. It might have been during a late rerun. One of those nights when you couldn't sleep, and your thoughts kept pacing instead of settling. The TV light tugged gently at your eyes. And there was SpongeBob, moving just a little slower. Not with exhaustion, but with the kind of calm that follows a long day. You might have felt something like this before, walking home when the sun was almost gone, noticing your own reflection in a window, and thinking, when did I start looking tired too? There was no dramatic moment where he changed. Nothing obvious. It was subtle, like aging tends to be. You just began to notice small things about him. His kindness felt more intentional, his optimism more focused. Even the way he walked sometimes looked like he was caring for his energy. Not reckless joy anymore, but thoughtful joy. The kind you have to choose. You could almost hear the soft hum of distant cars outside your own window as the episode kept going, unchanged, while something quiet inside you shifted. It didn't end there. The nostalgia you once felt watching him started blending with something else, something like gratitude. Because in a world that got louder and more complicated, he stayed simple. In a life that asked more and more of you, he still believed small moments could make a day worthwhile. Maybe that was the moment his laughter began to feel less childish and more courageous. You might remember a time when you sat down to watch just for the background, but ended up staying. Not because the episode was special, but because it felt familiar, safe. Like the show wasn't trying to pull you in. It was simply waiting in case you needed it. And that kind of quiet comfort ages well. It follows you, even into adulthood, even into tired nights and quiet mornings. Maybe SpongeBob never aged in the animation, but the meaning of him did. He wasn't just happy anymore. He was resilient, softly resilient. He got up each day, even when the world around him stayed chaotic. And maybe, in that way, he looked older, not in appearance, in spirit. The spirit that keeps going. The spirit that holds a little sunlight in its pocket, even after long days. You might have felt that while folding laundry late at night, or driving home with headlights passing like slow comets. When life begins to stretch out, and childhood starts to feel like a place you remember, rather than a place you live. SpongeBob starts to feel different too. Less like entertainment, more like company. And that wasn't where it ended. Because a character doesn't need wrinkles to age. Sometimes all it takes is time, and the memories that travel with it. SpongeBob grew older inside us, quietly reflecting the parts of life we don't always put into words. The parts that feel like tired smiles and deep breaths before sleep. Maybe he never looked older on screen. But maybe he didn't need to. Because sometimes the heart notices time long before the eyes do. There's a special kind of quiet that only shows up when a place meant to be busy finally empties out. The Krusty Krab was usually loud, orders being shouted, grease crackling, footsteps moving across the floor in quick little bursts. But the rumor goes that there was a scene, maybe a full episode, where everything took place after closing hours. No rush, no laughs, no customers, just the empty restaurant settling into silence, the way a body settles into bed at the end of a long day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how peaceful it felt. You could almost picture it. The lights dimmed just enough to leave shadows stretching over the tables. The chairs turned upside down. Legs pointed toward the ceiling like they were resting too. The cash register quiet for once. No coins, no receipts. Just the memory of noise floating somewhere faint in the air. That moment always felt familiar, even if you'd never seen it. Maybe because real life has places like that too. School hallways after dark, offices at night, restaurants after closing, spaces that usually carry energy, suddenly breathing instead. In this imagined episode, SpongeBob didn't do much. He swept the floor slowly, humming a soft tune to himself that never turned into lyrics. No rush, no clock ticking down, just the swish of the broom and the faint sound of wind pressing gently against the window. Maybe you've felt something like this before, walking through a classroom after everyone left, hearing your footsteps echo a little more than usual. It doesn't feel scary or lonely. It just feels honest, like the world doesn't need to perform anymore. The Krusty Krab felt like that too. Sometimes you could imagine the neon sign buzzing outside, flickering just enough to keep the darkness from fully taking over. Even the grill seemed calm, cooling slowly after hours of heat. There's a rhythm to places unwinding. Machines cooling down, smells fading, dust settling. Those little moments rarely get seen, but they exist everywhere. And that feeling only grew stronger later, as if the restaurant had a personality when no one was around to interrupt it. Maybe SpongeBob stayed a little longer after finishing his chores. Maybe he sat in one of the booths, elbows on the table, watching the streetlight glow through the window. No dialogue, just the hum of the nighttime, like the building itself was alive and tired. Not haunted, not abandoned, just resting before tomorrow. There was comfort in that thought, that even places deserve a break, that even the busiest rooms get quiet eventually. Liminal spaces like these often feel like secret worlds, the threshold between day and night, noise and quiet, work and rest. The Krusty Krab, in that moment, wasn't only a restaurant. It was a reminder that slowing down doesn't mean something is wrong. It means something is healing. You might have felt this while lying awake at night, hearing nothing but the faint buzz of electronics around you, or when the fridge behind you hums, as if it's keeping watch. Silence doesn't always mean you're alone. Sometimes it just means everything is taking a breath. Not every episode needs jokes. Not every scene needs purpose. Some moments simply allow the world to show another side of itself, the side that waits patiently when no one is looking. That's what made this imagined episode feel special. It didn't ask for your attention. It gently offered space for it. A soft pause between one day and the next. And that wasn't where it ended. There was something quietly meaningful in the idea that the Krusty Krab might have its own nighttime thoughts, its own way of remembering the day. As if buildings, like people, carry both the weight and warmth of everything they've witnessed. And maybe, when the lights go off and the door clicks shut, they finally get to let go. Perhaps that's why the image of the Krusty Krab after closing still lingers, because deep down, we understand it. We've felt it. We've lived it. That moment when noise finally softens, and the night air gently asks us to rest. Because sometimes the world doesn't need to be loud to be alive. Sometimes the quiet speaks just as clearly. There was a moment, no one agrees exactly when, where SpongeBob stood by the shoreline and looked out over the ocean. Some said it was the ending of an episode. Others swore it might have been the beginning. Maybe it wasn't either. Maybe it was simply its own moment. There was no music, just the sound of waves moving the way real waves do. Not looping, not perfect, just naturally drifting forward. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how it made you feel, like the world on screen was bigger than anything animation could hold. SpongeBob didn't speak. He just stood there, arms relaxed, eyes calm, almost like he'd been walking for a long time. The sky above him slowly shifted from gold to pink to a bluish purple, the kind of colors that show up right before the night fully sinks in. The tide kept moving, tracing soft lines in the sand. You could almost hear distant cars outside your own window, blending with the ocean hum. It didn't feel like fiction. It felt like a memory. Maybe one you never lived, but still carried somewhere inside you. The camera didn't cut away. Seconds passed, then more, and more. You might have felt something like this before, when time slows for no reason, and suddenly your thoughts begin to quiet down. The waves rolled in with a steady rhythm, like a lullaby that didn't need melody. SpongeBob didn't react. He didn't move. His stillness was the message, as if the scene knew that sometimes our minds don't need explanations, just space. It didn't end there. The ocean kept stretching across the screen, into a distance that didn't feel animated anymore. Some people claimed the horizon didn't loop. It expanded, like it wasn't drawn. It just existed. It looked exactly the way oceans do when the world feels too big, and your thoughts feel too small. And maybe that's why people swear it happened, even if they can't find proof. Some scenes don't live in footage. They live in feeling. Bikini Bottom, in that moment, didn't feel like a cartoon town. It felt like a place with history, with quiet corners yet to be seen, with roads that didn't always lead back to the main street. Maybe Sandy was working late in her dome. Maybe Squidward had already gone to sleep with his clarinet resting beside him. Maybe Patrick was watching the sky, thinking nothing and everything all at once. The episode didn't need to show any of that. It just needed to give space for imagination to roam. Sometimes, as the waves continued, it felt like the show was letting us borrow peace. Not flashy, not perfect, just gentle. You could almost imagine lying in bed, your phone screen dimming beside you, streetlights flickering through the blinds. SpongeBob, still quiet, still watching the sea, almost mirrored the way you watch the screen. Nothing was happening, but everything felt strangely meaningful. The longer it lasted, the less it felt like a scene. It started to feel like the kind of moment your mind returns to when it needs rest. No plot, no tension, just existence. And that wasn't where it ended, because when the camera finally pulled back, it didn't feel like closure. It felt like invitation, almost as if the ocean was telling you that stories don't always need endings. They just need places to pause. Maybe that's what made this moment memorable. Maybe it never aired. Maybe it wasn't real. But sometimes, imagination builds the things our hearts need most. And perhaps Bikini Bottom stretches as far as we let it, beyond episodes, beyond animation, into a soft blue dreamscape where thoughts can finally slow down. The ocean didn't end. It simply faded into quiet. And maybe that's where dreams begin. There's a story people sometimes mention. Not quite an ending. Not exactly a beginning. Just a moment when SpongeBob stood quietly by the water's edge. The scene didn't rush. It didn't try to impress. The camera simply stayed with him as he looked across the ocean, the waves moving the way real waves do, gentle, irregular, almost tired. There was no theme song and no sound effect, only water in its natural rhythm. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how it didn't feel animated at all. It felt like a memory, the kind that settles softly into the mind without asking. The shot lasted longer than usual. Maybe too long by normal TV standards, but some scenes don't follow rules. They follow feelings. SpongeBob wasn't smiling or crying. He wasn't being silly. He was simply present, breathing, watching the tide come in, and something about that simple stillness felt human. You might have felt something like this before, standing outside at dusk, realizing a day had already passed without you noticing when it began. People say the ocean didn't loop like usual. It kept flowing, like it had someplace to go. The sunlight shifted slowly across the water, melting from yellow to orange to purple. SpongeBob didn't react. He didn't even blink much. It was as if the scene wasn't part of the episode, but part of a place that had been there long before the show started. A place that didn't need dialogue to exist. A place that didn't need explanation to feel real. You could almost imagine watching it at night, with the TV glow resting against your blanket and the soft hum of a nearby fan filling the silence beside you. Maybe the window was cracked open just enough to let in a faint breeze. Maybe the streetlights outside flickered, like they were thinking about turning off. In moments like that, the line between reality and memory starts to blur. Thoughts slow down, breathing steadies, and a quiet ocean on a screen doesn't feel fictional anymore. It feels like something your mind has been searching for all day. It didn't end there. The scene kept going, without purpose and without urgency. SpongeBob eventually sat down on the sand, drawing his knees in, not sad, just resting. The sound design softened, until all that remained was a low tide and the whisper of wind. And maybe that silence mattered most, because sometimes it isn't action that holds us, it's atmosphere. And Bikini Bottom, in that moment, didn't feel like a cartoon universe. It felt like another version of the world, one where peace still existed, even when words didn't. Some fans don't remember what episode it could have been. Others can't agree whether it existed at all. But maybe that's okay. Some scenes are meant to live outside memory, not as fact, but as feeling. And that feeling only grew stronger later, as if the ocean wished to remind us that endings don't always require closure. Sometimes they just need space. Space to breathe. Space to let thoughts settle. Space to let dreams take over where reality leaves off. Even when the scene finally faded, it didn't feel like goodbye. It felt like an invitation into the shoreline, into nighttime, into quiet, into the idea that maybe Bikini Bottom isn't limited to a screen. Maybe it stretches as far as the imagination needs it to. Maybe it exists gently in the background of our thoughts, waiting for us when days get too loud and nights feel too long. You don't need proof to return to a place like that. You don't need a title card or timestamp. All you need is a moment of silence and a little room in your mind. Jellyfish floating like slow lanterns. SpongeBob sitting calmly beside the tide. And an ocean that doesn't ask where you're going, because its only real purpose is to let you rest. Maybe the ocean didn't really end. Maybe it just faded into dreams waiting quietly beyond the shoreline. There were moments, small ones, easy to miss, when the background characters in SpongeBob felt a little too still. Not frozen like lazy animation, but paused, as if they were listening. Their eyes didn't blink at the usual rhythm. Their bodies barely moved. They looked less like scenery, and more like observers. Not creepy, not unsettling, just aware. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was that sometimes it felt like they saw us too. Not with fear, not with intent, just quiet awareness, like they sensed someone watching from the other side of the screen. It wasn't constant. It only seemed to happen during slower scenes, when SpongeBob walked through town alone, or when the episode drifted into softer moments, without jokes. A background fish might turn its head a few degrees too long. A shopkeeper might look at the camera, even when no dialogue followed. It could be nothing more than coincidence, or an animation quirk. Or maybe the show was quietly hinting at something emotional rather than literal. Maybe the world of Bikini Bottom didn't just occupy space. It noticed presence. You might have felt something like this before, watching a cartoon, but suddenly sensing a deeper layer beneath it, one that wasn't written into the script. Sometimes, a character's expression seemed to hold more than just the mood of the scene. Their eyes carried something softer, like they were trying to understand the person watching them. And maybe that sounds odd, but late at night, when thoughts run loosely and the room feels bigger than usual, it starts to make sense. Background fish rarely had names or lines. They were often reused in different scenes, wearing different outfits, or standing on opposite sides of town. But now and then, their presence felt oddly consistent, like they were part of a rhythm we weren't meant to notice. You could almost imagine them continuing their lives when the camera cut away, opening shops, eating dinner, tucking in their kids before sleep. And in those pauses, when animation lines softened and the colors dimmed, it felt like they had thoughts too. But that wasn't where it ended. Some fans swear that in a few rare frames, a background character looked directly at the camera, not like a jump scare, more like a quiet acknowledgement, as if to say, "I see you too. Those moments weren't scary. They were strangely comforting." Because sometimes, even a fictional glance can feel like connection. The kind that reminds you that being seen, even for a second, can settle something inside you. Maybe it was all imagination. Maybe it was coincidence. But sometimes, imagination holds truth that reality forgets to mention. Sometimes, late at night, while lying beneath dim lights and street lamp shadows, a person might need to feel seen, even through a screen. And cartoons, in their quietest scenes, can unintentionally mirror that need. Not by showing sadness, not by asking questions, just by pausing long enough for us to breathe alongside them. There were times when those background characters seemed to feel what the main characters couldn't express. Squidward's loneliness, SpongeBob's hope, Patrick's contentment. They captured it in stillness rather than words. You might have seen yourself in them too, standing in your own background, living your own quiet days, going unnoticed, until someone truly looked. It's comforting, in a way, that even fictional figures in the corner of the frame might hold their own world inside them. It mirrors how real life works. Crowded rooms where everyone has their own story. Long bus rides where strangers carry memories we'll never hear. Sometimes, the most silent characters hold the deepest meaning. And maybe Bikini Bottom reflected that, without intending to. And when the episode ended, those characters stayed in the back of your mind. You didn't remember their names, because they didn't have any. You didn't remember their scenes, because they weren't important to the plot. But you remembered their presence, the way they made the world feel fuller. And maybe that's why they mattered more than we realized. Because sometimes stories don't stare directly at us to be understood. Sometimes they glance gently, and that quiet recognition is enough. There's a certain feeling that only shows up when streets go quiet. Not when they're abandoned, just when they're resting. SpongeBob's world was usually loud, filled with laughter and chaos. But every so often, someone would mention a scene, maybe a whole episode, where he walked through Bikini Bottom before sunrise. No jokes, no dialogue, just footsteps and soft light. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how peaceful it felt, like a dream you didn't want to wake from. You could almost picture it. Jellyfish drifting above rooftops, streetlights flickering gently, traffic signals blinking just to themselves. The sky would still be dark, but not midnight dark, more like that early hour when the night is almost ready to leave. SpongeBob walked through it slowly, not scared, not lost, just present. Nothing chasing him, nothing waiting on the schedule. That kind of stillness doesn't ask for anything. It simply allows. You might have felt something like this before, walking through school hallways after most people had gone home, or passing empty stores at night, their signs still glowing like distant memories. There's a quiet honesty to spaces meant for crowds when they finally get to breathe. They don't feel eerie. They feel relieved. The pressure to perform fades, and even buildings seem to exhale. In that imagined episode, SpongeBob didn't explore. He didn't hunt for clues or react to anything unusual. He just followed the sidewalk, occasionally stopping to look at the windows of familiar places. The Krusty Krab with its lights off, Mrs. Puff's boating school with no one around, even Squidward's house, still dark, as if it hadn't yet decided whether the day was worth beginning. It didn't feel empty. It felt sincere. And that wasn't where it ended. The longer he walked, the more the town felt like it had its own heartbeat. Slow, unbothered, like the walls remembered yesterday, but weren't in a hurry to meet tomorrow. You could almost hear distant cars outside your own window as the episode drifted gently forward. The kind of hour when breathing becomes slower, without trying. There are people who find comfort in quiet environments, in library corners, faded streets, grocery stores late at night. They aren't afraid of loneliness. They just understand that silence doesn't equal emptiness. It simply means there is space. Space to think. Space to rest. Space to exist without expectation. Maybe that's why this scene, real or not, felt familiar to so many. The camera didn't track SpongeBob closely. It stayed wide, showing distant buildings and long shadows stretching over the sand. SpongeBob looked smaller than usual, like someone walking through a memory rather than a town. No plotline pulled him forward. No urgency told him to hurry. The episode seemed to respect stillness in a way that normal pacing wouldn't allow. Sometimes the world feels loud because everything demands reaction, but in this scene, nothing demanded anything. Even the breeze felt polite as it moved past. The street signs looked like they were resting their eyes, and SpongeBob wasn't speaking because there was nothing to explain. It was morning before morning, a quiet bridge between two worlds. You might remember nights when your own lights were off, but you stayed awake anyway. The fridge softly humming, the air slow enough to feel, thoughts moving at a pace that didn't hurt. There's safety in moments like that, a safety that doesn't need proof or explanation, just presence. It didn't end with a big scene. It didn't end with dialogue. The sun simply arrived, not brightly, not suddenly, just gently easing the blue from the sky. The buildings started to glow the way they do when life is about to begin, but hasn't yet knocked on the door. SpongeBob stood still for a moment, almost acknowledging the peace that would soon fade into noise. Then softly, the day returned. But that quiet hour stayed like a secret pocket of time, meant only for those who know how to listen. There was a moment. Some say it was just seconds. Others swear it was a full scene, when the show stopped feeling like a cartoon. Not because the animation changed, but because something in the atmosphere shifted. SpongeBob was in his pineapple home. The lights were dimmer than usual, tinted with that soft orange glow you sometimes see right before the sun disappears. He didn't speak. He didn't act silly. He just sat quietly, like he'd lived through a long day. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how real it felt, like something you might have seen in your own life. He wasn't sad, just thinking, not frowning, not smiling. His eyes were softer, resting, like thoughts moved behind them at a pace that didn't need words. The camera didn't rush. It didn't cut quickly to another scene. It simply remained there, like someone had decided that even fictional characters deserved a moment to breathe. You might have felt something like this before. An evening when you sat in your room, not really doing anything, and yet somehow felt heavy and peaceful at the same time. Nothing about the room looked extraordinary. A lamp glowed gently in the corner. The fridge hummed in the next room. The static from the TV lingered like a distant lullaby. And SpongeBob just existed. It didn't feel like a scene that needed explanation. It felt like a pause. A real one. The kind you take when your mind gets tired of thinking, but your heart doesn't know how to rest yet. As kids, we watched scenes for action, but over time, we started noticing silence too. The way characters breathe, the way their eyes move, the way stillness can carry more meaning than words. In that moment, SpongeBob felt less like a character and more like someone we might know, or someone we used to be, an echo of ourselves that flickers quietly in the background. It didn't end there. The camera panned slowly across the room, showing the furniture, the shadows stretching along the walls, the stillness that made the air feel slightly warmer. It was the kind of moment that doesn't make lists or get quoted, but stays anyway. It stays because it walks alongside real life. And when fiction mirrors life too closely, it can be hard to forget. You might remember evenings like that, homework done, or maybe ignored, TV on, but barely watched, just sitting, letting thoughts drift into strange shapes, not sure where they're going. Maybe the fan turned softly above you. Maybe your phone screen dimmed on its own. Maybe music played so quietly you weren't sure if it was real or imagined. That feeling, the one where nothing happens, but something still feels important, echoed in SpongeBob's silence. The show wasn't trying to deliver a message. It wasn't teaching a lesson. It simply allowed space, and that allowed us to see something unexpected. Stillness can feel true. Stillness can feel human. Sometimes, what animation cannot say through words, it says through atmosphere. The dim light, the slow breath, the pause before moving on. Some people say they remember that scene, even though they can't find it anywhere. No screenshots, no clips, just an impression, a soft frame held in memory. Maybe that's because it wasn't part of an episode. Maybe It was created in the space between mind and screen, in the place where emotion fills in the gaps that writing leaves open. But that wasn't where it ended, because a moment like that doesn't need to be real to matter. It only needs to resonate. And if it resonated, if it lingered, then maybe it served its purpose without ever needing to exist. Fiction and memory sometimes meet in quiet places, in dim rooms, in silent scenes. And when they do, a character stops being just a character and becomes something gently familiar. Maybe that moment wasn't about SpongeBob at all. Maybe it was about us finally seeing ourselves in the quietest parts of the story. There was always something comforting about SpongeBob's voice. Bright, steady, familiar. But there's a thought some fans still carry quietly. What if the most peaceful moments were the ones where he didn't speak at all? Not because he was sad or scared, but because silence simply made sense. They say there might have been a lost episode like that. No dialogue, no jokes, just SpongeBob moving through his day, softly, gently, like he didn't need words to exist. But that wasn't the surprising part. The surprising part was how safe it felt, as if silence wasn't emptiness, but protection. You could almost picture it, SpongeBob washing dishes slowly, water running in a calm rhythm. No background music, only the sound of bubbles and plates clinking. His movements were unhurried, like he had nowhere urgent to be. The window beside him showed a sky fading into deeper blue. There was no narration, no laugh track, just atmosphere. And maybe you've had evenings like that too. Doing something simple, feeling something honest. No thoughts trying to be loud, just quiet work, just breathing. Sometimes silence can feel louder than noise, but in this imagined scene, it didn't feel heavy. It felt restful. You might have heard the faint echo of wind press lightly against the pineapple walls, or the refrigerator hum in a tone that almost sounded like music, but didn't quite become it. SpongeBob didn't fill the air with sound. He simply existed within it, and that felt strangely real, maybe even familiar. Later in the same quiet episode, if it ever existed, SpongeBob stepped outside. The sky had turned deep purple, and jellyfish glowed like floating lanterns above the fields. No commentary, no explanation, just the soft thump of his shoes against the ground. You could almost hear distant cars outside your own home, or the soft creak of pipes behind the walls. That moment didn't ask you to think. It invited you to stop. It didn't end there. SpongeBob eventually found a rock near the shore and sat down, feet dangling gently above the water, arms resting on his knees. The ocean whispered against the sand. The breeze brushed by like it didn't want to disturb anything. That lack of dialogue wasn't absence. It was respect. Respect for stillness. Respect for breathing space. Respect for the kind of feelings that are too quiet to put into words. Maybe this lost episode never aired. Maybe it never existed. But many people remember the concept of it, just enough to believe in the feeling it left behind. Because sometimes, silence tells the most honest story, the one where nothing dramatic happens, the one where we finally let go of trying to understand everything, the one where the mind can finally rest without explanation. You might have felt something like this before, sitting alone with soft light against the wall, letting thoughts drift like clouds. You didn't need to talk. You didn't need to react. You just needed space. And maybe that's why this version of SpongeBob feels meaningful, because he didn't try to entertain during those moments. He allowed stillness to do the work, and that kind of storytelling often lingers longest. Imagine that final scene, SpongeBob closing his eyes as the wind moves gently through his surroundings. No credits, no music, just the distant sound of waves, and your own breathing, softly matching their rhythm. The kind of moment where animation feels less like fiction and more like permission. Permission to rest. Permission to leave thoughts unanswered. Permission to exist quietly in the world without having to speak. Because silence isn't always empty. Sometimes it's healing. Sometimes it's everything we've been hoping to hear. There are some episodes we don't really remember watching, and yet somehow we still remember how they felt. Not the jokes, not the plot, not even the characters' expressions. Just a mood, a color palette, a certain softness in the background. Like a memory someone whispered to us. Not directly, but gently enough to settle somewhere inside. And that wasn't the strange part yet. The real mystery is how these feelings stayed long after childhood, as if they were carried quietly in our pockets, without ever asking permission. You might have felt it before, the way nostalgia doesn't arrive as sharp detail. It comes more like a breeze, pale colors, muffled sounds, the faint trace of being cared for without even noticing it. You don't remember every frame of SpongeBob. You just remember a sense of safety, a subtle glow that felt like morning sunlight slipping through curtains during summer vacation, when no one was rushing you to get up yet. Those memories are soft around the edges, and maybe that softness is what makes them last. When we try to look back clearly, the scenes blur. Maybe the couch felt too big. Maybe cereal tasted colder back then. Maybe the living room light felt warmer. SpongeBob wasn't just funny. He was part of the air we breathed. Sometimes, you'd come home tired, toss your backpack to the floor, and turn on the TV without thinking. The house felt quieter. The day felt finished, and Bikini Bottom always greeted you with the same colors, like returning to a town that never changed its weather. But that wasn't where it ended. Over time, the line between memory and imagination may have faded too. We don't know if certain episodes existed. We don't know if the stillness we remember was intentional. Maybe there was a scene where SpongeBob just watered his plants, humming softly with no dialogue. Maybe there wasn't. But our hearts believed it. And sometimes that belief matters more than proof, because feelings can be more accurate than facts when we're trying to remember what life felt like before things became complicated. Have you ever tried recalling your favorite episodes, only to remember quiet scenes instead of loud ones? SpongeBob waiting at the bus stop, Squidward reading alone, Patrick laying in the grass doing nothing at all. They weren't designed to be iconic. They were simply there. And maybe that's why they remain, in the same way certain childhood feelings do, not as moments, but as atmospheres. The fridge humming behind you, distant cars passing outside your window, shadows stretching quietly across the floor as a cartoon plays faintly in the background. Some people say the lost episode was never real. Maybe it was just how we felt at a certain age, between curiosity and comfort, between noise and quiet, when imagination filled the spaces that animation didn't show. That idea fits, doesn't it? Memory isn't always clear. It doesn't need to be. Sometimes it paints with intention instead of accuracy, using emotion instead of detail. You might have felt something like this before, remembering a moment without remembering why. And that's where the possibility lives. Maybe we didn't watch it. Maybe we felt it. Maybe the episode only existed in that invisible space between mind and screen, where storytelling brushes against personal history. We didn't need perfect clarity to connect with it. We just needed a feeling, a soft reminder that everything was okay, even if we couldn't explain why. Childhood doesn't replay like a movie. It returns like a scent, like light, like warmth. And Bikini Bottom, in some quiet way, became part of that warmth. It wasn't just entertainment. It was emotional wallpaper. It lived in the background while we grew up in the foreground. Maybe SpongeBob didn't need to age with us. Maybe he was meant to stay frozen in time so we could visit whenever we needed to remember who we used to be. There's a moment right before sleep, so soft you can almost miss it, where the light begins to fade, but your thoughts haven't let go yet. It's not daytime anymore, but it isn't truly night in your mind either. It's a quiet, in-between space, like the world is slowly lowering its volume. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part is how comforting that moment can be when you let it, when you don't fight it, when you simply drift. That's where SpongeBob's world felt different, as if it knew how to welcome that feeling better than anything else. Maybe that's why so many people watch the show at night. Not to laugh, but to settle. The colors of Bikini Bottom never felt harsh. They glowed softly, like they were lit by a lamp across the room, rather than a bright TV screen. The characters moved at just the right pace, not too fast, not too slow, like they were brushing the edges of sleep themselves. And when the episode reached its final few scenes, the world sometimes seemed to exhale, as if even the characters were getting ready to rest. You could almost picture it. SpongeBob closing the door to his pineapple home, the sky shifting into deep purples and blues. A single street lamp flickered outside. Maybe Squidward's window was already dark. Patrick might have been snoring softly under his rock. You didn't need to know what tomorrow held. You just needed the simple reassurance that for now, everyone was okay. Everything was quiet. And that was enough. You might have felt something like this before, lying in bed, staring toward a barely lit ceiling, your thoughts still moving, but slower than before. The fridge humming behind you, a car passing in the distance, the day still clinging a little, but not quite holding on. That's the zone this show sometimes captured, the place between consciousness and dreams. The last frame of light before the mind finally lets go. It didn't end there. SpongeBob might sit on his bed, legs dangling, eyes drifting toward the window, not thinking anything big, not worrying, just allowing nighttime to arrive at its own pace. The episode would taper off slowly, as if honoring a natural rhythm of rest. No rush, no pressure, just a gentle invitation. You can stop now. That kind of comfort isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. Some people talk about how they left the TV on purposefully, not because they were scared of the dark, but because they needed sound that didn't demand attention. SpongeBob's voice, fading softly into silence, felt like a good night without words. The kind of goodbye that doesn't close a door. It just lets it drift shut naturally. and the screen dimming at the end of an episode felt like light leaving the sky. You might recall that feeling, the way your eyes grew heavy, but you didn't rush to close them. You let the mind stroll a little longer. Thoughts became slower, images turned quieter, and Bikini Bottom, a place so full of life during the day, became a peaceful backdrop perfect for drifting. The characters didn't need to speak anymore. Their silence was enough to say, "Rest is allowed." Maybe that's why the last frame stuck with people. Not because of what happened, but because of how still it felt. It wasn't about closure. It was about openness, leaving space for dreams to begin where dialogue ended. You could almost imagine SpongeBob's house glowing softly in the distance, like a lighthouse you didn't have to reach, only recognize. And that wasn't where it ended, because some scenes don't really finish. They just fade, like sunlight fading behind clouds, like laughter softening into a sigh, like the moment when you finally stop pulling at your thoughts and let them fall gently into the dark. That final frame of light isn't meant to be remembered exactly. It's meant to be felt, the subtle rhythm of letting go, the quiet permission to rest. And tonight, maybe that frame is waiting again, ready to walk you into dreams. Most stories end with credits, but real life rarely wraps itself so neatly. Sometimes things just pause. No big moment, no final words, just a soft shift in the air, like a page turning itself. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how comforting that kind of ending could be, especially for anyone who feels deeply, but quietly. People who don't need applause or resolution, only acknowledgement. Something gentle to say. The moment mattered, and now it's time to rest. Some fans say there was a moment in SpongeBob that felt like a goodbye, though no one's sure which episode it was from, or if it even aired. A quiet scene, right before the ending, where the music faded earlier than expected, and the characters seemed to slow down. Not sad, not dramatic, just peaceful. SpongeBob glanced at the sky. Patrick leaned against a rock. Squidward paused by his window longer than usual, his expression unreadable. It wasn't a finale. It was something softer, like a world taking a breath before going still. You might have felt something like this in your own life, walking out of a friend's house after a long evening, with laughter still echoing in your head. Nothing dramatic happened, no formal goodbye, just the air cooling on your skin and the realization that the night was ending, even though no one said it. That's the kind of moment this section holds, the quiet shift between presence and memory. Sometimes endings don't need to be declared. They simply exist. Like the last light fading across the living room walls before bedtime. Like closing your notebook after finishing homework. Like a quiet car ride home, with music so soft that you're not sure if it's playing or just stuck in your head. Bikini Bottom, even with all its energy, seemed to know how to rest, too. To step back slowly when the story didn't have anywhere else to go. It didn't end there. Some say this unwritten goodbye wasn't scripted. Maybe it was in the way he waved at the jellyfish, like he knew tomorrow would start just the same. No rush to make it meaningful. No attempt to hold on to anything. Just trust that good things don't always disappear when they pause. They sometimes wait patiently in the quiet. Emotionally sensitive listeners, the ones who don't like abrupt endings, often felt safe in moments like these. Because when closure comes softly, it doesn't take anything away. It gives something back. It gives you time to process, to breathe, to exist in that space between still here and almost gone. You could almost imagine the background music fading into nothingness, not fading out sharply, but dissolving like a sigh finding its way into sleep. Sometimes, while lying in bed, you may feel that same sensation, the day ending without a final sentence, your thoughts slowing, but still wandering just a little. No clear goodbye to the hours that passed, just a slow drift into a softer place. SpongeBob's world sometimes mirrored that feeling, not through dialogue, but through silence. The kind of silence that allows memories to settle rather than scatter. The unwritten goodbye isn't a loss. It's a kindness. It's the world saying, you don't need to rush to leave. Just rest here for a moment before you go. And maybe that's what made those quiet scenes feel so real. They didn't ask for attention. They just created space. A soft wave sliding back into the ocean. A final frame of calm. And that wasn't where it ended, because endings don't always end. They sometimes wait beyond sleep, in dreams, in memory, in gentle echoes that follow us into tomorrow. Maybe we don't remember the exact episode, but we remember the feeling, that warm, unspoken goodbye. Some stories were never meant to be proven. They don't need endings. They don't even need beginnings. They live because we feel them. And sometimes, that's enough. The lost episode might not have been about SpongeBob at all. It might have been about us, quietly growing up, quietly missing days we didn't know were special while they were happening. But that wasn't the strange part yet. The strange part was how comforting it felt to carry a story we couldn't verify, as if mystery itself was a kind of home. We spend so much of life looking for certainty, for clarity, for answers that make everything make sense. But late at night, when the streets outside are quiet and the air gets still, you might feel another truth settling inside you. Not everything needs resolution. Some memories don't crave explanation. They just want to sit beside you, like a soft light at the edge of the room, asking nothing, demanding nothing. In that sense, SpongeBob's rumored lost episode becomes more of a feeling than a fact. It's the feeling of walking into your childhood living room again, even if it doesn't look the same anymore. The feeling of a blanket pulled up to your chest, the sound of a TV humming quietly, almost fading, while you start to drift. It's memory and imagination linking arms in a way that lets you return somewhere you can't physically reach anymore. You might have felt something like this before, where nostalgia doesn't replay a moment. It recreates its warmth. It didn't end there. Over time, we learned that stories don't have to exist in film or books to be real. They can live in us, in thoughts, in vague impressions that stay long after episodes are forgotten. SpongeBob might never have stared across an endless ocean. Squidward might never have slowed down in that particular way. Patrick might never have found peace in silence. But maybe our hearts needed them to, and so they did. Some nights, when the world feels too loud, we return to these quiet scenes. but because they're gentle. They offer silence where real life offers noise. They offer familiarity when everything else feels new and overwhelming. And Bikini Bottom, real or imagined, sometimes exists just long enough to help us cross that soft bridge between today and tomorrow. There's power in stories that ask nothing of us, that don't try to teach or fix or explain. They simply sit beside us until the mind slows. Those are the stories that don't fade, not because we write them down, but because we feel them. The lost episode may never surface online. There might never be proof, but there might also never be doubt, not in the heart of someone who needed it. And that wasn't where it ended, because maybe that's the point. Some stories aren't supposed to end. They're meant to linger, to live in the corner of memory like a dim lamp glowing just enough to guide us toward sleep, not telling us what's real, only reminding us that comfort exists, even when clarity does not. You don't need answers to rest tonight. You don't need certainty to feel safe. You only need something soft to hold on to, even if that something is just a quiet echo from a show that never truly left. Because some stories live unspoken. Some stories live unwritten. And some stories, the best ones, live only when the night is quiet enough to hear them again. Maybe we'll never find every lost episode, but maybe we don't need to. Some memories weren't meant to be proven, only remembered. If tonight felt calm, even just a little, then that's enough. Sleep well. Dream softly. Good night.